Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, Episode 23. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest on the show for one of her first trade media appearances is Karen Proud, the inaugural President and Adjudicator of the newly formed Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct, OGSCC. Karen was formerly President and CEO of Fertilizer Canada, COO for FHCP, President of Consumer Health Products, the predecessor. There's a bit of a merger. VP of Public Affairs of Retail Council of Canada, an accomplished executive in the food industry in Canada with all the right experience. I can't think of a better choice. Much respected, and a OG for the OG division. She's an OG
we have
in
our
the
own
industry.
OG, for
Exactly.
sure.
Hey, I was thrilled when she accepted our invitation to join us on the mic.
Pretty much, yeah, absolutely. And so I was looking forward to our chat with Karen and understand her vision for this organization / code. I mean, she started from scratch, so it's probably exciting times for her. But expectations are pretty high, and I know she's experienced enough to understand what she's going into. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll get to that later on in the show. Now, in other exciting news, we had a great conference call today, actually, with Tony Mayel from CL Canada.
Yeah.
Very exciting things are happening. More details to follow. But reminder, CL's in Toronto this year. Do not miss event April 29th, May 1st.
Oh, my goodness.
Back in Montreal last year. Goes back and forth.
Yep.
Once again, we're proud to be their media partner, official podcast for the show. Woot, woot. And you and I are likely to be on the stage at some point. So listen, we'll see you all there.
Absolutely. And you did your first gig at Ciel last year. So you're coming back for an encore.
So, Van, I wanted to know if you've, just speaking, and we were thinking about Ciel and the trade show, and the timing is really interesting, right? Because it feels like we're at this big point of, and I've been talking to a couple of retailers and vendors this week, there's this big inflection point around what to list, how consumers are thinking. Did you catch Michael Medline's note about upping their already pretty impressive game in sourcing Canadian product? Lactalis had a giant billboard, very bold, very fast, made with 0% American cheese. I predict a busy bunch of days at Ciel with this kind of sentiment and category disruption.
I do. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it is marketing, but I do think by building awareness, people will just start to realize that there are way more cane products than they thought there was at the very beginning. As I told you last week, I think we're going through our Mexican wall moment as a country. Back in 2017, Mexico went through the same thing. They were incredibly insulted by Trump's comments about building a wall, and they boycotted America for a very long time. This is our moment, and we're seeing many companies taking advantage of that moment and try to realign. Tim Hortons today, as they were announcing their financial results, Tim Hortons did mention that they are going to be reviewing their procurement strategy and perhaps buying more Canadian products to support their franchisees. So again, you're seeing all over the place. It's all about Canada. But will it last? That's the big question everyone is asking. Will it last? Because every time it doesn't last, we move on to other crises.
Yeah, it's a great question. I started to see some consumer research come out. Field Agent put out some research yesterday that had some pretty big numbers in terms of consumer behavioral changes. And I'm starting to think of it, maybe let me know what you think about this. I'm starting to think about it a little bit like sustainability. You know, what consumers say about how they'll shop in the context of sustainability isn't actually the way they shop. But there is a hardcore that really make decisions based on environmental sustainability, and there's a hardcore that couldn't care less, and there's the rest of us are somewhere in the middle. I'm starting to think about this like that, but listen, I've never seen numbers like this. And, I go back a bunch of years when I was at Hudson's Bay, and we had an American CEO come in and goes, "You guys must be winners because you just tell everybody you're Canadian." Well, as you heard, even Power Bank said, "I was shocked at the degree you don't care." Right?
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's kind of for Loblaw. This is an interesting moment because for the longest time, a lot of people, were boycotting Loblaw for some ridiculous reasons we all know. But now they're looking around, and Loblaw is a really interesting option for a lot of people. There's lots of Canadian products at Loblaw and at Sobeys at Metro, so it's going to be interesting to watch.
And at Walmart and Costco, right? I mean, there's lots of Canadian products on the shelf, so
I do believe, based on our calculations, we don't think that more than 9% of Canadians will actually boycott America, not necessarily look at Canadian products, but boycott America proactively for over 6 months. Okay. And so that's the number we have. We think we're right, but
I think that's interesting because that's on the hardcore of the spectrum, right? And then, in other words, that 9% says X, there's probably another 9% that couldn't care less than everybody else in the middle. If there's a choice to be made, they might make a choice of Canadian, in other words. Right?
That's right. Exactly. The dilemma I have in my mind is that are we actually buying Canadian because we want to or because we're against something else? And with time, we'll know. We'll know. Because right now, it's pushed by the hatred around one man. Okay? Will that hatred last? And it didn't last in 2017.
I remember back to last year's CL, I picked up a brand, Fire Barns, out of Quebec, some barbecue sauce. They gave me a bunch of barbecue sauce. And I have had so much in stock, I didn't get a chance to use it. I started using it. It's fantastic. Another great Canadian product. All right, let's move on. Let's get into the news. So the premiers of the provinces were behind enemy lines yesterday in Washington.
That's right.
Meeting with key decision makers like President Musk's son, XASH-A12, I believe that's how it's pronounced, in the Bring Your 4-Year-Old to Work Day. Now, asked of the premiers, there's a little bit of a presser, and Premier Legault was asked about, are you going to open up dairy? How are you considering? How are you thinking about your dairy business?
No, I just want to say a few words on dairy. In Quebec, we are against changing the management of the offer. The reason why we have that is to protect our regions, all right? So we don't give any subsidies to milk producer. So the only thing we do is we manage the offer, and it's a way to protect small farms in all the regions. So for us, it's not negotiable.
I would say the same thing if I was in his place, if I was negotiating. In other words, I'm not going to give away a key concession without getting something real in return. A carve out on aluminum, for example, very important to Quebec. What's your take? Is he negotiating, or are they never going to move, or it'll take a lot more to force a move?
First of all, I was expecting that response, but it's not really up to him. Really, when you think he actually said 3 inaccuracies today in Washington. One, he said that supply management actually represents regions well, supports regions. That's not necessarily true because we've lost a lot of farms in Atlantic Canada, and Quebec actually produces almost 40% of the milk that we produce in Canada, and they only have about 20% of the population. So supply management has severely benefited Quebec, and he knows that. I think he was probably referring to regions in Quebec, but still, we're losing farms. We had 42,000 dairy farms in 1972. We're down to 9,500, and we're going to go down to 5,000 by 2030 if nothing changes. With no Trump or Trump, doesn't matter. So 5,000, we're losing farms, so it's not supporting regions. 2, he said, with supply management, we're not subsidizing dairy farms. That's not true. Actually, there are plenty of programs supporting, subsidizing, and compensating dairy farmers for a variety of different reasons. Millions and millions of dollars are actually given to the dairy farms, but most of these things are not openly disclosed. You have to work through budgets and things like that to understand what money goes to dairy farmers. And lastly, my first point, it's not negotiable. Well, it's not up to him. It won't be up to him. They're going to be forced into a deal. And my concern since day one is that dairy farmers are so adamant in protecting the status quo. They're not thinking strategically about, implementing a plan for the future. And right now, even if there is no U.S., we're still in trouble. This sector is our industrial milk is 3 times the price compared to the U.S. 3 times the price, Michael. We're not competitive. So what's the plan?
You were on a big TV show in Quebec. I'm always impressed by the numbers.
Tout le monde en parle, yes.
I'm always impressed by the numbers. So many people watch it in Quebec. There's the biggest media market. And you were talking about this issue. You've been talking about this issue.
You say one thing on Tout le monde en parle, and everyone talks about it the next day, for sure.
Well, and clearly you were saying some things plus or minus about this issue, and you've been thinking about it for 25 years that got some energy created afterwards. What were you talking about on the show, and does it connect to this
it was
issue?
very subtle because we were talking about tariffs and Trumps and interprovincial barriers. And I just made a one sentence comment about, if we're serious about making Canada a true competitive market and an open market for the agri-food sector, there's no other way to do it but to actually tackle provincial marketing boards and supply management. That's all I said, really. And of course, the next day, as usual, I get emails, DMs telling me to
We love you.
off.
Keep it up. I was going to say, Legault isn't the only guy saying this. Who was it? Anita Anand said, federal cabinet minister and the soon-to-be gone Liberal Party said, yeah, we're not going to touch it. It's off the board.
But here's the thing about politicians, Michael, okay? They always say, we can't touch supply management. We support supply management 100%. Ask the following question. How does it work? Explain to me what you know about supply management. They have no clue. They don't know. They don't understand the policy. Most Canadians don't understand the policy. It's complicated. And dairy farmers have taken advantage. Like, I've actually had a discussion once with a minister of agriculture, and I won't tell you which one. And I asked them, why are we compensating dairy farmers, when we're signing trade deals with Europe, Asia, and America? Why are we giving them money? They're not losing money. And then they said, no, they told us they lose money. Point to me one farmer, okay? Identify one farmer who has lost money as a result of a trade deal. We've given them $5 billion. $5 billion in compensation for trade deals. But what happens is that they recalibrate quotas and farmers leave the industry, and that's how they downsize or they right-size the industry. Nobody's losing money, but they've convinced politicians that they are losing money. And so Canadians think that farmers actually have made compromises, but they haven't. They just leave the industry altogether. So I'm really upset and tired of seeing dairy farmers or lobby groups misleading the Canadian public. It's been going on forever.
If I gave you a magic wand or a magic jug of milk or something, and we fast forward, listen, I want something. This is a negotiation with a negotiator, so I want something if we're going to open the market to more Wisconsin dairy. It feels like, back to the top of this show, it could be the fact, well, if we bring that dairy in, the Canadian consumer says, well, you're American, I prefer Canadian. And that's is that the landscape you envision, is that the consumers can make that choice?
I think so. And I think that consumers deserve a choice. But at the same time, we need to understand two things. Dairy is good for our regions. And two, we need to keep production capacity at home. So how do we do that? So as we try to make sure that our system is more open, more flexible, that's why I've always believed that the quota system needs to stay. But at the same time, I do think that the federal government or even the Canadian Dairy Commission, which is a federal crown corporation, should play a role in harmonizing the quota allocation system. Instead of giving all that power to provinces, just let the feds harmonize that system. But the problem with that, Michael, and you know that, is that once you do that, if you allow out-of-province buyers to buy quotas from other provinces, you're going to see quota values go up and down. And in some provinces, quota values will go up, Ontario, and some quota values will crash, i.e. Quebec. And that is why politicians just walk away. But I do feel that this time around, it may be different. Let's hope it's different so we can actually have a really strong conversation about the future of supply management.
You made a comment to me off mic about tariffs, and maybe they're not as inflationary as we think or as we think they are now. Are you talking about our retaliatory tariffs, or are you talking about tariffs as the American consumer will experience them?
Tariffs in general. Actually, I was listening to an economist from Asia this morning, and he got me thinking. And so he was talking about tariffs the last time Trump was actually in office against steel and aluminum, because we went through that rodeo before. And tariffs were implemented at the time, and there was barely any change in inflation, really. Because why? This is his theory. Companies basically absorb the shock of the tariff to remain competitive and retain their portfolio of customers, basically, for a while, until politics deal with tensions and things like that. So inflation is not really impacted all that much. But there is an exception, and that exception is food. Once you start touching food, then it gets sensitive because of margins that are so low, perishability and all that. Food is different. And that's why China, very recently, if you notice, when China decided to retaliate against America, they retaliated, but they actually left soybeans and corn alone. They didn't actually add more pressure on those commodities. They only aimed at agricultural machinery, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, if you actually want to make yourself unpopular, aim at food. Apply tariffs on food, and people will hate you. And I think that Trump is interesting, but he's not stupid, I don't think.
A couple more things before we get into our interview with Karen. The liberal race, Freeland, trying to break through basically what is pretty much a runaway race for Carney, at least the way I see it. And she's kind of focused on shrinkflation all of a sudden and capping food prices. Are we in some kind of fantasy world, or is this the return of the vibe session economy?
I just said vibe session. Yeah. I wish I would have 5 minutes to talk to Miss Freeland. I think she's talented, but her policy idea is really misguided to cap profits and freeze prices.
No shrinkflation and freeze packaging, basically.
I'll get to that in a second. I think we both agree that capping prices and capping profits are a bad idea. Margins are very low, and as soon as you start playing around with prices, you discourage investment, and you basically wind up with shortages.
A Soviet economy. You wind up with a Soviet economy.
Exactly. I mean, the Quebec milk case is a strong one. Quebec is the only province in the country that regulates milk prices at retail, and it's the most expensive milk you can find in Canada. So that's not ideal. The other comment she made was about shrinkflation. Is she wants to make shrinkflation illegal. Now, if you do that, you're going to see prices go up. We all know that, okay? But I think she missed an opportunity to really tackle the real issues around shrinkflation. I've said that to you way before. One, don't tax food, because there is more food being taxed due to shrinkflation. So I would tackle that, okay? So for example, if there are 5 bars in a bar of in a box of granola bars, that's taxable because it's a snack. Shrinkflation is making the pool of food products taxable larger and larger and larger every year. I would tackle that.
Remember your other example was ice cream, right? When it shrunk to a certain package size, it suddenly became a snack versus.
And people out there think that we only tax bad food. No, we tax snacks, and some snacks are actually good. 4 muffins, not taxable. 2 muffins, the same muffins, that's taxable. So it doesn't make sense. I've always been really uncomfortable seeing food being taxed at retail. I think it's immoral, and I think she should have actually dealt with that. It was a good opportunity to actually deal with this issue, and she would have made actually a splash, because it would have been different.
It's an original idea, right? It's a good original idea to break through. Well, there you go.
Of course, is StatScan, of course, not evaluating the impact of shrinkflation on inflation itself. That's the other issue.
Let's just stick with tax for one last second before we get to our interview. The end of the GST holidays coming up. I've seen Moneris, the folks who run the rails for transactions. They say there is pretty much no effect. Restaurants Canada is a little more optimistic, saying there is a bigger effect on their members. In fact, they're advocating that it not go away, at least for the restaurant sector. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on
they actually
the impact?
did recommend the end of the GST on prepared foods and including at retail, and actually agree with that. I agree with the retail part. I don't know how you feel about that, but would you eliminate the GST at the restaurant?
Well, they want to get rid of it on prepared foods because of grocery stores being grocer ants and competing with restaurants. That's
exactly
straightforward. That's got nothing to do with sound economics. That's got everything to do with eliminating a big piece of competition for restaurants, right?
Well, what about restaurants? Are you like in favor or?
No, I don't see it. Really, other things. I don't see it. I think there's a lot of other things they can do. I mean, the constant drumbeat is, hey, we don't make any money in restaurants. Well, some restaurants do, and it's your industry. Go manage it so you can make some money, or
the ready-to-eat counter. If you go to the ready-to-eat counter and look around, who's actually buying? I see a lot of seniors. I see a lot of folks who can't cook, who don't want to cook or live alone. I mean, that's the reality. That's why I've always seen prepared foods at restaurant being very different than prepared foods sold retail, because the clientele and the intent, the reason why they're buying these products are very different. And so I've always wondered, why are we taxing these foods? Like a Caesar salad is actually quite healthy. We're taxing a Caesar salad or a sandwich or a healthy sandwich. And I've always been uncomfortable with the whole process anyways.
For you, it gets back to that
the GST holiday,
anyway.
to me, what's going to be interesting is to evaluate opportunity pricing. Have prices gone up? So StatScan in December told us that we're paying less for food compared to November.
Yep.
But our price is cheaper. Yeah. Our price is cheaper. That's the question. And my guess is that perhaps it may have actually contributed to making prices higher, both retail and service. But of course, because of everything that's going on, the blackout, the GST holiday, the Canadian dollar, all these things are going to be impacting food prices in one way. It's going to push prices higher. So it's going to be very difficult to isolate the impact of the GST holiday, unfortunately.
Well, all right, let's take a break. First, we're going to hear from our most excellent presenting sponsor, Cattle, and then we'll get to our most excellent interview with Karen from OGSCC. Does your digital customer engagement strategy need a serious upgrade? Enter Cattle, Canada's consumer insights powerhouse with the largest, most active panel of everyday shoppers. They're not your typical sponsor. They're the voice of the consumer, always in the know on the hottest trends and shaping what's next. So why Cattle? They go beyond consumer insights. They're trailblazing the future of ratings and reviews and leading the charge in user-generated content with unmatched syndicated receipt data and the ability to gather reviews across any category. Cattle partners with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire to deliver results that count. Visit askcattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's askcattle.com. Karen, welcome to The Food Professor podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Fantastic. You and I know each other from your prior roles. It's great to hear your voice again. Where are we finding you? I think you're in Ottawa, yeah?
Yeah, today I am just west of Ottawa at my home in Carp.
Very nice. Very nice. Born and raised in Ottawa, so I always like to hear what's going on in Ottawa. Such a center of excitement these days, I'm sure. Now,
yeah.
Let's talk about you. Do us a favor to introduce yourself a little bit and your professional journey. You've got tremendous accomplishments, and now you've got this exciting new role that we want to talk to you all about. But let's first understand a little bit about your journey.
Sure. It's been a sort of long and winding road, I guess. Not a real traditional path to get to where I am. But I started my professional career actually working for the federal government at Health Canada. So I worked at Health Canada for a decade, focused on enforcement and compliance at the very beginning. I was an enforcement officer working out west, and then I found myself coming back to Ottawa, where I'm from, and working in policy and legislative and regulatory affairs with the government. So very much involved in developing regulations, policies, compliance programs, all the fun and exciting stuff. Then I left the government in 2006, and I went into the private sector, where I have spent almost 20 years now, sort of working in various roles in associations with industry. The last 10 years was leading industry trade associations, and that's what sort of got me to my current role, heading up Fertilizer Canada, which I've been doing for the last 4 years. Interesting.
Now, let's talk about, as you mentioned, you got a new job coming up, starting on St. Patrick's Day. I wanted to ask you if there's a meaning to having it start on St. Patrick's Day, by the way, but we'll get to that in a minute. But you know, were you recruited for this role? Did you throw your hat in? I didn't know that you had this policy. I knew you had policy and advocacy, but I didn't know you had the enforcement piece. So now I'm starting to connect a few dots here. But whether you were solicited for it or you threw your hat in the ring, what interested you enough to make this change and take this challenge on of how do you describe yourself? The adjudicator, president? Tell us about the role.
Yeah, so the role is president and adjudicator of the Office of the Grocery Sector Code of Conduct. I'm very excited to be starting that on the 17th, but I have had a lot of people ask, what was I thinking?
Do you wear robes and a wig in this role? Like, how formal?
It sounds very much like that, doesn't it?
It does.
It's an incredibly interesting role. It's the first of its kind in Canada, and I think just in that makes it intriguing. I did have previous exposure to the Grocery Code of Conduct. As I had mentioned, I worked in industry trade associations. So a number of years ago, I worked for the Retail Council of Canada that represents the grocery sector, among others. Also, just before starting my current role at Fertilizer Canada, I worked at Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada. I was Chief Operating Officer there. So I was aware of the code and the discussions around the development of the code. I was very much aware of sort of the different industry players, having worked on both sides. And
did you ever think it would happen back when you were sitting in those seats? Like it seemed like a far off chance that it was even going to come to fruition, and now you find yourself the president.
I know, and so 4 years ago, it was just as I was leaving Food, Health and Consumer Products to take this role. There was an unveiling of the first iteration of the Code of Conduct, where FHCP and Sobeys had worked together on a code, and it was sort of presented as a straw dog, so to speak. I think I had anticipated that it would come to fruition. The governments had certainly gotten on side by then, and I was really pleased to see last year that it got sort of through all of the process, and I think that's a really great sign that we could get all the key players to sign on. It was a lot of work, I'm sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Now, as you think about, before I pass the mic to Sylvain, one quick question. As you think about, I don't know, maybe it's not a quick question, but it's quick. Maybe it's a long answer. But what are your top priorities your first 100 days? I mean, you've both got a new role in a new organization, and how do you say, okay, here are the 4 or 5 things I need to get done in the first 100 days? What does that look like?
3 or 4, I wish. So you're right. I mean, it's a new organization. The organization doesn't even exist yet, really, other than on paper. I'm the only employee. So just getting the office up and running is a key priority. One of the key roles of the office is to provide information and education about the code. The code comes into force in June. So, just the things such as getting a website up and running that can address those needs, getting some staff on board so that we're able to respond. I've been getting a lot of requests to come and speak at various conferences, and I'm saying yes to all of them because it's important for me to get out there. So just getting that infrastructure in place is really key. One of the things I've been talking about sort of needing to do is to get a sense of the state of readiness of the sector, of all the different players with regards to the implementation of the code. And that really needs to be a top priority because that's going to help inform the office and myself as to where we need to put our energies. And so if we find that there's a big education gap or knowledge gap with regards to the code, we're going to need to focus on that. So that's, key to the beginning, but just, getting prepared for June when the code, comes into force, so to speak, is a major focus of the first, 30, 60 days.
So first of all, I must say, Karen, I'm surprised that we haven't had you on the show before today because you've done so much for the industry over the last several years for many organizations, both in the private and public sector. And when I saw your appointment, I must say I was just not surprised. I mean, I think when I saw your name linked to the organization, I thought, well, that's the right person for the job. And as you know, I've been a big advocate for the code of conduct for many, many years. So I'm really, really reassured by the fact that you're going to be the one responsible. So if you don't feel enough pressure now, there you go. You're getting even more pressure.
I was going to say, Sylvain, and no pressure at all there.
But there is some skepticism about the code, though, and you're fully aware of this. So the fact that it's a voluntary code.
Yes.
You're going to have to navigate through that skepticism. How do you plan to handle that?
I mean, it is a voluntary code, but, I think that people need to also look at the fact that we have gotten all the major players signing off on this voluntary code. And I think that speaks volumes as to the commitment of these organizations to the code. This is not something that they did lightly. There was a lot of discussion, as you well know, Sylvain, and need to get this right and balanced. And the fact that they've signed on, I think, is great. The other thing, as you would know as well, there is a lot of scrutiny over this initiative by the parties involved, but also by governments, not just federally, but the provincial governments, the elected officials. And so I think everybody is motivated to make this work because the alternative, and it's a very real alternative, is that this gets regulated as it has been in other countries. And so I think there is that motivation to make this voluntary code work. And the different players have demonstrated so far that they're all in on it.
Throughout your career, of course, you've had the pleasure to work on both sides of the power balance or imbalance, both retail and manufacturing. So how do you plan to address this? It's out there a lot. Most people know there is a power imbalance out there. How do you plan to address that big kahuna?
Well, I mean, the code addresses this. So my job is to make sure that all the various players are following the code. So it's not, Karen Proud making up rules to address the issues. The code has been created, and it's my job to, and I use enforce sort of lightly, but to enforce the provisions of the code. I think, come with a good perspective in that I understand some of the intricacies with the different players and the different points of view. And I think, the main thing that I need to do in my role is to build the relationships and the trust between and amongst the various stakeholders in order to, use persuasion to ensure that the provisions of the code are upheld by all parties.
Mm. And the fact that you're out there, you've accepted our invitation, you're accepting invitations to go and speak, and I think that's going to make a big difference. Oh yeah, and I encourage you to continue to do that. Before I pass it back to Michael, so you're representing an organization that doesn't exist yet. You have no employees yet. There are no enforcement mechanisms in place yet. And so how do you plan to keep industry accountable, and how do you plan to make sure that there is compliance out there? I know it's a very, very tough question, but I just want to get your sense of where you're at right now in terms of the code itself and how you intend to implement it.
Well, I mean, there's no enforcement. It is a voluntary code, and the office doesn't have the same sort of powers as they have in the UK over fines and other things. But a very important tool that we do have is through our communications. And so, I intend to be very transparent around how things are going with the code, issuing my reports. We'll have to look at sort of how that rolls out. There will be an annual report as to how the code is functioning, what the issues are. And I think that's a very, very powerful tool that can be used positive and as part of the persuasion to ensure that people adhere to the code. And I think that's really important. As you said, I am going to spend a lot of time with different organizations, having conversations, speaking about the code, promoting the importance of the code, and we will see how it goes. And there may need to be adjustments as we move along, as there were in the UK when they first came out with the code. It's not the same code as it was when they first came out.
There's some critics, for example, I don't know, my co-host, who thinks the code focuses a little too much on business-to-business relationships and doesn't do enough for the Canadian consumer. I mean, it's not a consumer complaint process; it is a B2B vendor to retailer process. How do you think about that when you reflect on the broader sense of what a code is meant to accomplish here in Canada?
I mean, it is a business to business code. If you read the code, that's precisely what it is. It's to address issues between suppliers and retailers, issues that have arisen over time. And the idea is we get a better relationship between suppliers and retailers, and consumers will ultimately benefit. I think time is going to tell as to how that rolls out, but it's very important that we focus on the provisions of the code. And it is not a consumer complaints. When we see that there's a lot of misinformation, I think, out there as to what this code is and what it is, and what it might achieve and what it might not. And so, ultimately, if the code works, we can look at other countries and see that it has improved business. It's brought, new products, new opportunities for suppliers to participate in the sector, which is, ultimately beneficial. And I think there's a lot of sort of trickle down effects to a successful code implementation that will benefit consumers.
Sylvain, just let me address that with you. Would you have written something different in the code? Would you have written a consumer component? I mean, I think one of the benefits of this is its clarity of purpose. But how did you think about that when as you mentioned it once or twice? How do you think of it in the short and longer run?
I mean, basically, I think that over time, I I do think consumers are going to be really at the center. But I agree with Karen. There's lots of information out there and false expectations.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, basically, a lot of people out there think that the code will make food cheaper. That's not the case. I do expect food inflation to be more in check, but it won't eliminate food inflation. Actually, you don't want to do that. So there's that educational piece that is required. So obviously the code would need to be I guess sold to the Canadians, because I do think that they just think that this is going to be the silver bullet to their ills at the grocery store forever, which is not the case.
Karen, you've mentioned the UK, and we know this isn't the first code in the world. There's also Australia. What, as you think about looking either to the UK or Australia, any lessons from those models or their practice that you're taking and learning from?
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the experience in the UK and Australia and New Zealand with regards to their codes. It's different, and so we have to keep that in mind. Canada is a bit unique in that our code is reciprocal. It's also sort of everyone is in, which can be a challenge, but. I think we need to keep that in mind, but absolutely there are lessons to be learned from those who already have codes in place. It is part of, my first 90 days in the office will be to reach out to my counterparts in those other countries and see what can be learned from their experience. If we don't have to reinvent the wheel here, and we can sort of learn from what went well and what didn't. I think that's really important, especially the UK, because they do have quite a lot of time with a code and a lot of experience to share. So I'm looking forward to having those conversations in order to not make the mistakes they did and learn from the things that have gone well.
Could you say a little bit about what the difference is? You talked about everybody in here, and that was a different complexity. Could you just say a little bit more about what's different about our code than those other two codes?
Sure. So, in my knowledge right now, and of course I haven't started the job yet, but when I look at the UK code, there are, I don't know the exact amount, but I think 12 grocers that are the subject of the UK Code of Conduct. And it really is a one-way code. It's about grocery practices, their behaviors with their suppliers. In Canada, ours is a reciprocal code, which means there are requirements on suppliers as well as grocers, and all grocers and suppliers are parties to the code. So, I'm sure I'll come to envy the UK, where they have 12 stakeholders or key stakeholders within the code. But that's really where the differences lie, and I think it's important, and perhaps over time, those countries can learn from the Canadian experience with regards to sort of where we've come with our code.
Last question at a very high level, Karen. How do you expect the grocery industry to evolve in the next, say, 5-10 years as a result of seeing the Grocery Code of Conduct being implemented? What are your expectations?
I mean, my hope, Sylvain, is that we do experience, what I've heard anecdotally from the experience of the UK, where the relationships between the grocers and suppliers are much improved. Those business relationships are much improved. That then, sows all sorts of benefits within the system. That would be really an ideal situation, showing that the code is working. Right now, we're living in such sort of crazy times, really. It's difficult to think about what the evolution is going to look like within the sector in Canada. I mean, every day there seems to be something else, impacting the sector, and how Canadians are going to step up in light of tariff threats and other things. So I think it's tough to predict, but certainly at a very basic level, my hope is that this code does what it's supposed to do. And I'll certainly work very hard to make that happen, which is to really improve those business relationships so that we can all benefit.
That's great. Again, Karen, congratulations on your appointment, and we look forward to see you in action and make the grocery sector great again or something. I guess that's the theme these days for a lot of things. But no, to be honest, I think that this is going to be great for our food sector, and I think they're going to be acting as a great arbitrator for all the disputes or all the things that would need to be addressed over the next little while. So again, thank you very much for your service, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again.
Oh, absolutely, Sylvain. I appreciate your confidence in me, and I'm certainly going to do everything I can to make this work. But I'd be happy to chat again. As I said at the beginning, I am not turning down any invitations. I think it's so very important. It's one of the principles of the code, sort of that openness, transparency, engagement, and so I'm looking forward to chatting again, maybe when we're into implementation and we can check in again.
You wrote an op-ed. I want to talk to you about eggs for a bit. You wrote an op-ed, basically what we were talking about last episode, but I had a couple of questions. Yep. One, you saw some cracks, which I thought was very clever of you, in the pricing in Canada, that there was some pressure coming. We talked about unscrambling the omelet, which is a whole other thing. I had two questions. Tell us more about what you're seeing, and B, America is really struggling with eggs. I saw big retailers, Costco, Walmart, limiting to, it's like baby formula, limit one per. Can we sell eggs to America? Can we ship eggs across the border?
Of course, yeah. They can't sell it to us. So if we were the ones in trouble, they would have to sell it to us, but they would have to pay a tariff of over 200% because it's a protected market.
Is there a tariff on Canadian eggs into America?
Going to America? No,
it seems like
it is possible that it's coming. But with the shortage we see in the U.S., I don't see why Trump would do that, to be honest. And so that's why food is always. I mean, food is incredibly sensitive because because of biosecurity risks, because of climate change. I mean, a lot of things can actually change on a dime, turn on a dime.
Could you see, one of these like Costco or Walmart operates on both sides of the border? Goes, hey, we got great partners. We got Burnbury Eggs. They're an amazing partner. Why don't we buy them from Canada? Can you see that?
But the reality of the quota system is that we produce what we need as a country. There are no surpluses. There are not supposed to be any surpluses. That's the thing. And the avian flu is hitting BC a lot, and that's why Alberta is actually shipping some eggs over to BC. And to be honest, I think the egg industry is much more efficient. Barriers don't really exist. That and that's why I've never targeted the egg sector, because they got their act together. Dairy is very different. But no, we produce what we need, so we're not supposed to, unless you want to set up a category for laying export, hands
for export,
that's fine, but forget about tariffs. I suspect that Americans would basically ask us to actually eliminate any tariffs for products coming into Canada.
Yeah, we're both seeing some news out of the market that is kind of wrapping up 2024. Now these reports start to come out. The big research houses. I've been talking to people. You talk to people. I was curious. I saw in the U.S. that private label sales moved up 4% in 2024 versus 2023, which is a big number. And I was kind of curious to see if that was happening in Canada. It looks like it is. It looks like there's some shifts in what I saw. Was interesting. I heard that there are shifts of branded product being sold at more value-oriented retailers. So their share was moving around. Hey, what have you been hearing about the end of 2024 or the year 2024?
I mean, I've actually seen some reports, and I've been talking to people, and I think the heavy discounting era is over. People are starting to shift, and they're starting to spend more money at the grocery store, which is actually good news. And so so discount stores are seeing less business, and a lot of conventionals are getting more business. So there's that shift that started really in November, December. And so we are expecting that shift to continue into the new year. That's the big thing that caught my attention. And of course, your comment about private labels, absolutely. I think there is more interest around private labels because, that stigma, a lot of people just avoided private labels because they think it's bad quality, but they're starting to realize because of inflation, they went towards private labels only to realize that these products aren't that
Products
bad.
are great. Yeah, products are fine.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Last but not least, I want to circle back on something we were talking about that I kind of surprised you with last episode, which was, as RFK looks like he's going to be nominated. So I just want to circle back on. I asked two questions. One is there was, what is the peer-reviewed research consensus, if there is one, around seed oils, good or bad, and the same thing for raw milk. There's actually a great article in the New York Times about the debate around raw milk. So as a researcher, you often talk about peer-reviewed studies, and you've done many kind of, what did you call them, meta surveys, or did you do any, and did you have a chance to do any work on figuring out what consensus might look like on either of those issues?
No, absolutely. And you did ask a really good question last week, and I think to a certain extent you were right. I think seed oils actually are good for you, but they are. There's a lot of research out there suggesting that there are limits. You have to be careful. You can't overdo it. But it's like that with every food, right? If you eat too much of it, that could actually be a problem from a health perspective. So generally speaking, these products are, I mean, it's a big deal for Canada, of course, when I'm thinking about canola in particular. So obviously the rhetoric around seed oil is certainly a concern because there's little evidence that that these products are actually really, really bad for you. They're very good for you, but don't abuse it. That's basically what the literature is saying.
And that's also in the context of your other options, right? Your full fat, you see, who was it? RFK was making a turkey and he was boiling, deer fat or whatever fat he was making it in. And the general consensus was, listen, you're better off with canola. It's better for your heart.
Exactly.
Is that a fair statement?
That would be very fair. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of drama around RFK's comments in health. And I mean, we've heard some really bizarre comments coming from him.
What about raw milk? You said you thought the market in Canada was 8 to 9% for raw milk. Again, this New York Times article highlights the benefits, but the fear from people say you could die from this. Like, you could get a serious disease and die from it. But what did the research, what's the consensus in the peer review?
Yeah, the people who say that probably have a link to the dairy industry because they don't want it to happen, right? We've always believed that about 9% of Canadians are interested in buying raw milk on a regular basis. Probably because they're predisposed to the product when they were a kid, or they are familiar with it and they understand that the virtues of raw milk are very good for you as health-wise. And frankly, have you ever drank raw milk yourself? No? So it tastes different. Pasteurization really kills flavor. That's the one thing you realize when you drink raw milk. It actually tastes like milk, not like water. And so that's the difference. And so people are looking for that flavor. But other than food safety, there's no concern at all. And a consumer is not like the biome and everything else. It's not because of how you're raised and where you were raised that could actually make you that could make actually raw milk safer for you. It's a matter of adopting the product over time. So I wouldn't overdo it at first, but you kind of get your products to adopt to raw milk consumption overall. But technically, unless you have a very weak immune system or your immune system is compromised, or you're subject to lots of allergies, or you're allergic to lactose or intolerant, I wouldn't touch the raw milk. But generally speaking, there's no danger. But my concern in Canada is that there's a lot of campaigning around, oh, raw milk is bad. American milk is bad because they're using growth hormones, which is true, but it's a very small portion of dairy farmers. So there's lots of noise pushing Canadians to believe that the current system we have is perfect, and it's not.
Well, that's about it for the show. We've had we had great guests. Thanks, Karen, for being on the show, and thanks, of course, Cattle, for being our sponsor. We got lots more guests coming up for the many weeks ahead. And although a reminder to check out Seattle, I'll put a link in the show notes. You and I will be there with a nice big podcast studio. We'll be having some fun there. But for now, let's leave it there. I'm Michael LeBlanc, media entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Safe travels, everybody.
Take care.